Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're calling from. Thank you so much for joining forth on our first webinar in our fall webinar series. As you remembered, we took a break in June and now we are back. We have a lot of conversations ready for you for this season, but today we will be discussing accelerating equitable EV adoption, challenges and opportunities in the US. My name is Simbiat Yusuf Mahler. I'm the events manager at Fourth. Before I pass it along to our moderator today is Tom Taylor, who is the senior policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. We will be going through Q&A shortly after all of the presentations. We will also be sharing with you the webinar slides and recording shortly after with resources from our from our speakers. And if you are new to our webinar series and you don't know what's this organization called Fourth, we are on a mission to electrify transportation by bringing people together to create solutions equitably. Our work is done in focus areas. We have our access to electric cars, which you'll be hearing from our senior program manager on the work they do shortly. We work in access to charging, access to emerging modes, events and partnerships, and policy advocacy. If you have any questions on the work we do at Fourth, you can find that information on our website, and a link will be dropped in the chat shortly. And the work we do would not be possible without the support of our members and sponsors. If you would like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities for something called the Roadmap Conference or the webinar program or membership, you can find that information on our website, and a link will be dropped again in the chat. And you can chat with our wonderful partnership and membership manager, Rachel Haverkamp. And if you are in the job market or you know someone in the job market, we are hiring currently for a program manager to join our access to charging team. We will follow up with more information on that. And again, a link will be dropped in the chat. Please share this opportunity with your network. You want to join us at Fourth and join the work we're doing, or you know someone that would be interested or qualified to join this position. And as I mentioned, we are just over 6 weeks away from something called the Roadmap Conference. The Roadmap Conference is going to be happening this September 24th to the 26th. I hope you're ready or have booked your tickets for travel and you're already registered. And hopefully what I'm saying is already known to you all. But I just wanted to quickly highlight, we have set our main stage and we have some great content ready for you at Roadmap. Our main stage, we will start with a welcome to Detroit. This is our first time in Detroit. Carla Walker Miller from Walker Miller's Energy Services will set the stage, welcoming us to Detroit. And we'll end our first day of content with a fireside chat highlighting getting more electric cars on the road. This will be a conversation between Marco McCordy of Uber and Donna Dickerson of Ford. And our day two, we will start with a plenary session of journalists and communication professionals on electric transportation trends, challenges, and opportunities. That will be a great conversation that you don't want to miss. But you also want to stay for the end of the Roadmap Conference because we have our final keynote from Jigar Shah, who is the director of U.S. Department of Energy Loans Program Office. And he will be highlighting how widespread transportation electrification will help achieve our climate goals, strengthen the grid, and create jobs nationwide. Again, I hope that teaser was enough to get you all registered. If you would like more information on the program at Roadmap, our keynotes, that all will be found on roadmapfort.org and the links that we have shared in the chat. And now that will be enough from me, and I'll pass it over to our moderator today to kick us off so we can start the conversation. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Simbi, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm also excited to be going to Detroit in a couple of weeks. And so if you are there, please say hi. It's nice to have a chat at these conferences and to have people come up and say hi. So yeah, hope to see you all there. My goal for today is to get out of the way as much as possible so we can hear from our three really clever panelists. The way that it will work is that each of our three panelists that I'll introduce very shortly will speak about a bit about their work for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to open up the floor for some questions. And so encourage you to chime in the chat, to mull over some questions that come up, and then we can try and get to them after the presentations. Very briefly about me, I'm a senior policy analyst at Atlas Public Policy. I'm based in Washington, D.C. My work revolves around a bunch of data tracking and data analysis. And so there are three main tools that I would highlight very briefly. The first is the Climate Program Portal. So with some colleagues, we track federal funding from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we're looking at where that funding is going for climate programs. The second tool is the Clean Economy Tracker. It is a free, open to the public tool, no sign up required. You can download the data, and that tool helps you and users to see where all these manufacturing projects are going. And so I encourage you to have a play around with that tool. The final one that I would flag is the EV Jobs Hub. And so with that tool, we look specifically at EV manufacturing projects. And we also look at federal funding. We look at unionization. We look at 30D eligibility. And we try and pull that all into one place, again, to allow the user to toggle and understand the stories that they're interested in. All those tools are free. Encourage you to check them out. And get in touch if you have any questions. But let's get into the panelists. So I want to introduce very briefly our three panelists. Then we're going to get into an icebreaker, and then we'll hear from our panelists. First up, we have David Reichmuth. David is a senior engineer in the Clean Transportation Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. David's work focuses on analyzing new vehicle technologies and advocating for policies that support the increased electrification of transportation. Next, we have Ed de la Fuente. Ed is a senior program manager at Forth, and Ed leads the Access to Cars programs team with the mission to reduce barriers and provide equitable access to electric vehicles. Finally, we have Rosa Davies. Rosa is the Business Development Director at Veloz, and Rosa serves as Rosa has 6 years institutional knowledge in public charging and an overall 10 years working with renewable energies. Before we hear the presentations from our panelists, a very quick icebreaker. And so I'm going to ask this to each of our panelists, but would love also if you can chime in the chat if there are other stories that you've been paying attention to. So my question to our panelists and to you all, what's one positive trend in equitable EV adoption you're paying attention to? I'll say it again just for you all. What's one positive trend in equitable EV adoption you're paying attention to? So I might start with David, if you could chime in first, and then we'll go through our other panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think one thing that comes to mind is just that we are in a place right now where there are more and more affordable EV options out there, including long-range EVs. If you look 10 years ago, the only long-range option was a $90,000 new Tesla. And now we're in a place where there are both new and used EVs that are at a price point that is more affordable for the average car buyer.
Yeah, agreed. Ed, I'll bring you in next.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Hi. I guess I was thinking right along the same lines. Maybe I'll take another kind of trend that is adding into this affordability, this kind of the fact that the electric vehicles are becoming more affordable. I think the states and the federal government are looking at ways of making cars more affordable in an equitable way as well, and that I think is helping. And it's an interesting trend seeing those states and incentive programs be put out there, and we just need to help people get to know that they're out there.
Yeah, agreed. And Rosa, finally.
Yeah, sure. It touches a little bit on that affordability piece that David and Ed are referring to. One trend we're excited to see is that the cost of the electric vehicle lithium-ion battery packs for light-duty vehicles are down significantly. According to the DOE, the price declined about 90% between 2008 and 2023, and is due to improvements in battery technologies and chemistries, as well as the improvements in manufacturing and increases in production volume.
Nice. Well, I know you'll all speak to that question more in your presentations, but encourage you to keep chiming in the chat with other things that you're watching or trends that you think are interesting. For now, though, Rosa and Ed, I'll let you relax and turn off your camera, and we'll pass over to David to get us started. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Tom, for that introduction, and thanks to Forth for inviting me to speak here today. So I'm going to be talking about EV incentives really in the California context, but I think that a lot of these things are applicable to a lot of other states here that are working hard on adoption of EVs. So I first want to give some context in terms of where we are in the market. EV sales in California, despite what you might read in the media recently, are hitting new highs. We're on pace right now for close to half a million EV sales per year in the state. And for the first half of 2024, it was 25% sales. So that's 1 in 4 of all new cars sold in the first half of the year in California were electric. That's either battery electric or plug-in hybrid. That's incredible growth. Sales were less than 60,000 when you look 10 years ago in 2014. And the other thing we're seeing is this sort of, we mentioned the icebreaker, is that we got new lower priced models on the horizon, and also increasing regulatory requirements. And so we think that, sales will continue to grow, even farther. But that means we're in a different part of the market than we were 10 or even 5 years ago. We're past the earliest adopters, and we're getting more into the mainstream buyers. And that means we're also in a position where funding a state level rebate in California for all EV purchases is really difficult to maintain on a fiscal basis. And that's why California's main rebate program that was sort of available to many buyers was ended last year. So we're really in a place in California where we need to target the state incentives, and we can use those more targeted incentives to address barriers to adoption, and also to look at inequities in sort of EV distribution in maybe our transportation system more broadly. Now, there is some good news here also that we have a revised federal tax credit. So for new purchases and leases, and that's up to $7,500 upfront off the cost of an EV. And those incentives are important because we need to continue to increase the rate of EV adoption. Even we need to go beyond what the regulations say, and we need to increase the rate of adoption to try to slow down the number of new gasoline vehicles being added to the road and to reduce emissions. And also point out that the new federal credits, or the revised federal credits, also now include a credit for used EVs. And so you have both new and used credits, and they can be potentially used at the point of sale rather than waiting for next year's tax filing, which makes it easier for people to afford that large upfront cost of a new vehicle. So currently California has 2 sets related sets of EV incentive programs. There's Clean Cars for All, which is a regional program running in 5 areas of the state. They're run by regional air quality authorities. And there's also a new program called the Driving Clean Assistance Program, which is going to be a statewide program to cover the areas that those regional programs don't cover. And that's going to roll out later this year. That statewide program is going to start in Imperial County down south, and then eventually be available statewide for everyone by, I think, the spring of 2025 is what the target is. But the basic features are really similar. These programs give car buyers a voucher of up to $12,000 towards a new EV or recent model used EV when replacing an older gasoline or diesel vehicle, plus credit towards public charging or an EVSE, that's a home charger. So there's also mobility option in these programs. So meaning that instead of scrap and replace, you can just scrap and get funds towards transit passes, car sharing, or e-bikes. And then there's also a financing assistance component of these programs, meaning assistance with a car loan. And that includes a cap on the interest rate for the statewide program. Now, financing assistance is important because the upfront cost of these EVs is still often higher than a gasoline car. One thing that's important to emphasize about this program is the importance of outreach to communities. This program is a voucher program, unlike the previous California program that was a rebate program. So the voucher program means that you need to apply and be approved prior to buying the EV. And because there are restrictions on the scrap and replace component, restrictions on who's eligible, that also requires outreach to make sure people understand how this program works. And finally, we have dealers and automakers that aren't advertising this program in the way that they might advertise the federal incentive availability or the way that they used to advertise the previous state incentives. So this program is targeted in a number of ways. First, there's an income cap on the program. Second, incentives are increased for those living in state-designated disadvantaged communities. And third, the program targets those that are scrapping an older vehicle. And I really want to drill into that last part because that's really important. The older vehicles are a large source of air pollution in California. Now, we did a study last year in conjunction with the Greenlining Institute where we looked at the emissions from older passenger cars and trucks and also looked at who was impacted. So what we found is despite the fact that gasoline and diesel vehicles that are more than 20 years old, so that's 2003 model year vehicles and older, they're less than 20% of the vehicles on the road, and they only drive 12% of the miles every year, but they're responsible for nearly 3/4 of the nitrogen oxide pollution from passenger vehicles and a majority of the reactive organic gases. And so these older vehicles, these pollutants like nitrogen oxides and reactive organic gases lead to the formation of fine particulate matter, which is called PM 2.5. The important thing to know about that is it's an air pollutant that is linked to significant public health impacts and shortens lifespans. So we used an air quality model to look at where this pollution from older gasoline vehicles went and who was exposed. And what we found is the highest exposure in Southern California, but there's hotspots throughout the state. And we've looked at, more importantly, if you look at the population in those most heavily impacted areas, we found that lower income households were much more prevalent. And also the communities with the highest exposure had a much higher fraction of Latino and Black people when compared to the areas with lowest exposure. So if you come back to the incentive programs for EVs, so we want to see these programs succeed in sort of increasing the rate of transition to electric vehicles. That's an important outcome we want to see. But we also see this as an opportunity to remove the most polluting combustion vehicles from the road and reduce those health impacts of those vehicles. And one other thing I want to point out is that beyond the environmental and public health benefits, we also know that these older gasoline vehicles are costly to refuel and maintain. So there can be an economic benefit as well for households that can replace their older gasoline car with an EV. Potentially lower fuel and maintenance costs, but also higher reliability, so that so that people know that they can get to work, get to school, get to their doctor's appointments, because they have an EV that they don't have to worry about whether it's going to start or not in the morning. Now, the one barrier here that I'd like to call out is that the current state budget situation in California. We think that these programs like Clean Cars for All and the Driving Cleaner Assistance Program are very important so that people can make that switch to a cleaner vehicle. So we're working alongside other groups to try to make sure these programs are fully funded and can do their best to improve the equity of EV adoption. With that, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll turn it back over to Tom for our next speaker.
Thanks, David. And reminding people to please put your questions in the chat for David and for our coming panelists so we can get to them in a bit. But I'm going to pass next to Ed de la Fuente, who's the Senior Program Manager at Ford. There we go. Over to you, Ed.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Appreciate it. Sure. So glad to be here to talk about accelerating equitable EV adoption. It's an area that's very dear not only to my heart, but to the work that Ford does. Let me, there we go. For some reason, I need 2 clicks. Okay. Well, so the things that we see as important to making EV adoption equitable are around these 3 things: affordability, awareness and education, and certainly the availability of charging. Right. In affordability, it's making that upfront cost, that upfront expense lower for the communities that more so need it than others, and also creating financing programs to make an automobile purchase or an EV purchase, more available to folks. And then awareness and education. One of the things that I've seen out there are that the programs exist. There are programs from the federal government, the state government, local governments as well, and the utilities. And people just don't seem to be aware of them. And so there's work needed in that area. Veloz, Rosa's group does amazing work in that area. We think also putting people in an electric vehicle helps them understand the benefits. It's not so much a mystery once they try it. And it's been really interesting at some of the events that we've done in areas where, for example, in rural areas where people have not had the exposure to electric vehicles and have what I'd say are some misconceptions and just some concerns, and we talk a little bit. And then once they actually decide to take a car for a drive, they come back and will say, "Oh, I'm impressed. I need to give this a little more research." And so that giving that experience, I think, is really important. And also, as I mentioned, just addressing some of the misinformation that's out there. And charging is very important. Of course, one of the key anxieties around accessing a vehicle, an electric vehicle, is the range anxiety. And how do I charge the vehicle? Where can I charge? And it's a different mindset in terms of how you approach the fuel in your vehicle from what we've gotten accustomed to with gasoline cars, where there's gas stations pretty much everywhere, to where you do a different thing, where you top off your vehicle each evening so you know you're starting fresh, or you plan your trip a little bit more. And then, of course, making charging affordable is important as well. Oops, I jumped. So just wanted to give you some interesting, at least I found interesting, thought you'd find interesting trends out there. The electric vehicles, of course, have been known from the beginning to be expensive because they were, and of course they still are. The prices could need to come down, and they are coming down. This chart put together by IEA with information from Inside EVs shows that in 2024, this year, the most models in the price segment are in that $50,000 to $75,000 price point, whereas in just last year in 2023, the most of the vehicles in this lighter line were in the $75,000 to $100,000 price point. And an interesting thing that I see in this graph is that in this year, the number of models in the $40,000 to $50,000 price range have doubled. So there's many of options out there, and it's great because that also causes competition and will continue to bring prices down from the car makers, from the dealers, for those looking to purchase an electric vehicle. And as well, as I think David mentioned, the used car market is growing, and that's making vehicles much more affordable, where cars that were sold new over $40,000 are now available to people with only a few years on them and pretty low miles at $18,000, for example. But more help is needed in that as well, and I think that is coming from the states in a good way, as California has certainly been leading the way. Other states are also creating programs that focus on an equitable distribution of those incentive dollars. Fourth has worked with the state of Washington and Oregon to develop their programs. Washington just announced this month the Instant Rebates Program, which is all equitable income based and provides up to $5,000 on a new car, $2,500 on a used car, in addition to the federal tax credits. And as you can see, other programs in Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont are also addressing the incentives in a income-based way. So as I mentioned, we've worked with the states in bringing those, in researching those programs, in our advocacy work and policy work. Fourth has worked with states to understand the needs of the community. So what will work best for that given state, the residents of that state, to help them then develop the programs. We also have worked in the loan area and financing, because not everyone can has the down payment, for example, to start purchasing an electric vehicle. And so we've worked with these partners to do so. We started locally, for example, with Metropolitan Family Services in Portland, in their Electrified Ways to Work program, where they provide low interest loans for EV purchases. That's electric vehicles and electric bikes as well, because for some people, an electric bike serves the needs of transportation to get, for example, to commute back and forth to work, and they don't need to make the larger purchase of an electric car. And so we're now taking that program. We're working with at least more than a dozen partners to take that program nationally and create tools for different regions so that they can understand the needs of that community and create financing programs for that community in particular. That's a program that's ongoing now. We do a lot of outreach and education. As I mentioned, the ride and drives, we hold other events to inform people of the incentives and the different programs that are available to them to purchase a new or used electric vehicle. As I mentioned earlier, it's pretty amazing how much we have these great programs out there and people are just not aware of them. And I think part of that is that people really only pay attention to what's in their current needs. And so if they're not in the market for a car and they hear about this, they may not be grasping it. So I believe they need to hear it more often, so it becomes part of kind of known knowledge, right, that these things do exist. And so that when they are in the market, or they decide that they are ready to purchase a vehicle or need to purchase a vehicle, that they know about these programs, that are aware. Because typically we will ask at events or have a survey that says, are you aware of these different programs? And the typical answer is no, I had not heard of any of these. So we do a lot of outreach to help inform people of the programs that are available to them from all the different sources, as I mentioned before, not only the federal, state, local governments, but utilities as well that are providing these incentives. And then there are people who just don't need to purchase a vehicle to take advantage of an electric vehicle. And so Forth has a large national car share, EV car share program that we work together with community-based organizations to bring cars to people who need them just for temporary uses, such as going to the supermarket, going to a doctor's appointment, taking children to school. It makes that much more affordable to people as well. So if you have questions on any of these programs or developing your own and can use some help, please let me know. My contact information is here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Ed. That was great. I'm going to pass over to Rosa Davies now. Rosa's the Business Development Director at Veloz.
Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here. Let's see, am I advancing my slide? Yep, there we go. I wanted to start off a little bit about just talking about Veloz. Veloz is the power behind the nation's largest and most inventive multi-stakeholder public awareness campaign for electric vehicles. We're the architect of events and programming garnering both state and national attention, and the organization bringing together a high-powered, diverse board and members from the public and private sector. The organization was launched in 2017 and is built on the California Plug-in Electric Vehicle Collaborative, which was founded in 2010. Veloz is also a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are comprised of the most important players in the EV industry, providing a unique consolidated voice to move the electrification forward. Our members include state and local agencies, automakers, charging providers, utilities, car dealers, traditional and autonomous rideshare providers, and other NGOs. And for the last decade, Veloz has been a key player in policy education in meeting members throughout the EV ecosystem to move barriers and bust EV myths, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. So you should all be seeing a funnel now that shows how we take consumers from awareness to action. In the land of Veloz, electric for all means two things. It's both our vision, the future for transportation is electric, and it's the name of our consumer-facing website. This funnel bridges those two things together through our theory of change, which connects actions to outcomes. Now, the first action is to bring awareness. You'll see that at the top of the funnel. We do this by using funny, original video spots to garner attention and media campaigns that draw viewers to our website, electricforall.org. For in-depth EV education of vehicles, charging incentives, a key point in EV education and why we are doing this is that there's a lack of awareness when it comes to the benefits of driving an EV, their cost, and how to charge them. There's also quite a bit of misinformation and disinformation spreading that is delaying the next wave of EV adoption to hit. And what we wanted to point out on this slide and at electricforall.org is that governments are funding infrastructure and vehicle incentives, and the private sector is increasingly adding more chargers to their networks and increasing product offerings. And so as I transition to the next slide, we'll be putting a poll up. We want to know if you've ever been to electricforall.com. How do I move to the next slide? Well, I guess I'll just wait. All right, I think 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're done. All right. So that went too quickly for me to see the results, so I'm hoping we can see those later. So as I just stated, the hub of the Electric for All program is electricforall.org, which serves as the ultimate EV education and awareness website for consumers. Current and future EV owners can get the facts about going electric, shop and compare electric vehicles, find location-specific vehicles, and charging incentives for all zip codes in the United States, and discover home charging options all in one spot. We are in the process of expanding the tool on this site to be national, so be on the lookout for a fresh website overhaul within the next couple of months, and the new coverage will include all zip codes with populations over 50,000 people, and will identify Biden administration's Justice 40 communities. Okay, the results were 32. Yeah, 32% yes, and the rest were no's. Okay, guys, that means next time I take this poll, we need to see those numbers jump a little bit. I think once you're on there, you'll be able to really engage and understand the weight of what we're doing. All right, next slide. Success statewide campaigns. So Veloz's Electric for All public education campaigns are developed at the intersection of Hollywood-style entertainment and best-in-class information as a way to raise awareness, bust myths, and provide direct access to tools that will help consumers make their next EV purchase an easy one. The campaigns are a product of an unprecedented collaboration between the private sector, companies, including auto manufacturers, charging infrastructure organizations, and public sector agencies, with the vested interest in accelerating transportation electrification. Let's start first with Opposites Attract. In fall 2018, Veloz rolled out the first phase of Electric for All with its cheeky Opposites Attract social and digital media campaign, using the power of short form video and memes to communicate directly to target audiences. And at the launch of Opposites Attract, 50% of Californians knew next to nothing about EVs. So this campaign focused heavily on EV awareness and to really kick off the EV movement. The following year, Kicking Gas, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, was the second Electric for All campaign powered by Veloz and helped shoot Electric for All into a whole nother stratosphere. The campaign was picked up well outside of California and gave the EV movement a much needed jolt of momentum. Then what happened after 2019? COVID hit. And in early 2021, during the COVID pandemic, 40 Million Reasons was a campaign that spotlit Mark Ruffalo, Chloe Bennett, and local superheroes as agents of change, fighting for social, economic, and environmental justice, celebrating California's many cultures. The video branched outside of light-duty vehicles a bit and went into highlight e-bikes, scooters, electric buses, and underscoring the reasons why every Californian should go electric. And that brings us up to our most recent campaign, which is Myths Busting Myths with that Sasquatch there. There's a Sasquatch, a unicorn, and some other things. And I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into this campaign. Here we go. The 15-month campaign took everything we learned from past campaigns and consumer behavior, like what messages resonate in the current market preferences around who delivers the message and consumer attention spans. We used research on these market barriers as myths to create a campaign aimed at researching diverse and historically underserved communities to educate, inspire, and dispel the myths that are holding people back from choosing to go electric, whether that's to own, lease, or rent an EV. So the top banner you see are the types of media channels like programmatic connected TV, CTV, gas station TVs, billboards, outdoor projections in 4 major cities throughout California. We also had targeted social media ads. And on that bottom part, you'll be able to see those numbers. The campaign focused on sending consumers to the Electric for All website to use the consumer tools that I talked about just a couple slides ago. Veloz also had a Spanish language version of Electric for All and drove traffic there via commercials, banners, and partnership with Univision. Okay, I'm going to speed up a little bit now. So Myths media by community. So let's talk numbers. Veloz spent about 50% of our budget in priority communities and tracked the resulting outcomes by priority, non-priority communities. You'll see the definition of how we define those there. Priority communities included neighborhoods that disproportionately suffer from historic environmental, health, and other social burdens that are geographically defined by the state of California's Cal Enviro screen. And then let's go ahead and talk about these metrics. The headings first. So impressions are tracked anytime anyone sees the campaign creative or messaging. This includes visual and audio creative run through paid and organic channels, along with messaging and earned media in the campaign. Views and listens, video views, and audio listens are tracked when consumers view or listen to paid and organic media across all channels. Websites visit by community. These are tracked from paid and organic creative as well. And then conversions. Conversions are tracked as specific actions taken by consumers on electricforall.org. These include users clicking from electricforall.com to one of the websites we have out there, like an automaker website or a charging website. So then let's talk about the different colors. Paid. While spend is easily trackable, each media mode creates separate categories of trackable impressions. So Veloz paid media buy includes paid social media across things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, gas stations, iHeart Media, display a native advertisement, and so forth. An example of paid unknown is where you're in a gas station and we're not really sure which community you're part of, because you could be living in this neighborhood and fill up over here. And then organic or known are news outlets that are picking up our story in some sort of PR piece. So the takeaway here is, if you look at the bottom two graphs, is the priority, or the non-priority groups are the ones that are visiting the website a little bit more, but then are clicking onwards to possibly take action. And this could just be an indicator on where they are on their sales funnel, their EV shopping funnel. One last slide here. So the campaign research have found that 75% of people improved their consideration of EVs as a result of seeing the campaign. The campaign effectively targeted the priority community with 45% ad recognition within that demographic. Post-campaign, 81% agreed that charging an EV is fast, easy, and convenient, and 72% said that EVs are more affordable than they thought. All right, so then to wrap it up here, as I mentioned, we're in the process of relaunching electricforall.org as a national site. We believe that media campaigns similar to Mythbusters and other past campaigns will continue to have a place in the market. And our next campaign is going to expand outside of California in partnership with more organizations. So, all right, Tom, back to you.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I will invite the panelists to turn their camera back on. We're going to jump into a couple of questions here. I'm going to get us started, but in the meantime, encourage you to keep asking questions in the chat, and then we can try and get to as many of them as possible. So the first question, I think, is certainly on my mind, and we're doing a fair bit of work around this, but on Friday we will get to 2 years since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, this pretty consequential piece of legislation. And so I wanted to ask each of our panelists if you could speak to this federal funding, and particularly when we're looking at that funding from an equity perspective, what are some of the main challenges you've seen so far in terms of delivering those funds? I might start with you, Rosa, so we go in reverse order this time.
Sure, I'm happy to talk again. So we know that according to the U.S. Treasury, more than 250,000 EV buyers have saved approximately $1.5 billion since January of this year, thanks to federal tax incentives on EV sales. One of the biggest challenges will continue to be, as we've discussed in this webinar, whether those incentives are marketed and utilized by those who need them most. Our answer to that is our national rollout of the incentive information on Electric for All. And then additionally, charging infrastructure is one of the biggest issues being tackled. The NEVI program is investing $5 billion over 5 years to grow that national network of chargers from 130,000 to 500,000 by 2030. And to date, half of that federal funding has already been released for project states across the nation. And we're seeing states leverage that federal funding to create state level funding as well.
Next, Ed.
Yeah, sure, Tom. I can kind of follow along with what Rosa is saying. I think it is one of the biggest challenges is awareness overall. First of all, awareness of the funds available, especially to lower income communities, and then understanding how to get through which part of it applies to them. So going through all of the different qualifications, right? How do you qualify for the funds at the federal level, and then certainly at the state level as well? There's all these different rules and things to follow, and it's very helpful when there's some kind of a tool available to make it easier for people to do that. So I think that's the key. I mean, we certainly need to keep the funds coming, but then make it easier for people to learn about them and access those funds.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I mean, the IRA program is super super helpful. I think one thing that is still difficult is the used car incentive, and that it, because of the restrictions on the MSRP and the sales price of the car, and some of the other restrictions on sort of how it can be used, it means it's probably not helping as many people as it could if it wasn't as restrictive in terms of. And so we're going to need to hopefully see more cars that qualify for that used credit. And I think that we're also, I'm hoping that we're going to see more cars at the lower end of the spectrum qualify for the new incentive in terms of meeting the manufacturing requirements. I think that's the challenge, is sort of like the supply of cars that meet both the used and the new incentive requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into some of the questions that we're getting in the chat here. Please keep sending them through. These are great. Let's start with a question from Heidi. Heidi, you've asked a tricky one that we see come up over and over, and so the question is: are complaints about mining minerals for EVs and low supply real concerns? I know that maybe this is not necessarily the area of expertise of some of our panelists, so I'm going to share a podcast conversation that I thought was really good about this with a researcher from the UK. But I'm going to open it up to our panelists, and I think David particularly, to speak to this question and about circularity and how that could be part of the answer here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the question about mining and materials is an important question, and we don't want to replicate the mistakes that we've seen for decades that have happened with the petroleum extraction in terms of the impacts on the environment, on the impacts on people. So we have some research ongoing at UCS. A colleague of mine, Jess Dunn, is leading that work, and I think that we are looking at recycling as a method to reduce the amount of new materials needed. Now, recycling is not the complete answer, because as we grow this EV market, there's just not going to be enough recycled material to make all the batteries we need. So we will need new materials, but recycling can help reduce that. We're also looking at the impacts of EV efficiency and EV range. We are seeing some of the EVs go to, become larger and less efficient, which means they're going to need more materials. So if somebody needs a gasoline F-150 pickup, moving to an electric F-150 is great. That's a great use of that. If it's somebody who is driving, 60 miles a day, commuting, one person on the freeway, they probably, that inefficient electric pickup truck is probably not the best option. And the other thing is range, is that people really want to have longer and longer range EVs, which is good because that means they can replace more trips. But as we get more public charging infrastructure, and that people become more comfortable about taking a trip where they can recharge along the way, means that they might not need a 400-mile range battery, say, to do all their driving. And so that's another thing that can help reduce the amount of materials, but still have us transition away from gasoline and diesel to electricity for powering our vehicles.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk, to raise a question from Francisco. The question is about equitable access to charging infrastructure. And so the question, in short, is that manufacturers complain that there's not enough demand for EVs in some communities, particularly disadvantaged communities, for them to install chargers. And then people in disadvantaged communities say that there's not enough chargers for them to be able to buy an EV. So you have this chicken and egg kind of challenge. Maybe I'll start with you, Ed, if that's okay, to speak to how can policy help address these kind of challenges?
Yeah, I think the question about accessible charging is really important, given that not less, I believe less than at least half or less than half of the population lives in multifamily dwellings. It isn't suburban homes that have garages and are able to install a charger. So I think policy around multifamily dwellings and having charging available for the people who live there is really important, and making that affordable and accessible. So that would be the first thing. I think also looking around the community at things like curbside charging, and just making it easily available for people when they're going about their daily lives to be able to kind of top up and charge up the car for what they need, for the next part of their trip, or even just to get above what they feel comfortable for if their car happens to be lower on fuel. So I think those are the couple of areas that can be helped with in the area of policy.
And Rosa, I might throw you a slightly different version of the question for you. Can you speak to, in your work, what you hear from people about charging, or some of the main sort of misconceptions about charging that come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sasquatch did it best in myths busting myths, which is you can't find a charger. Um, there's a lot of apps out there that you can use to find charging. Um, each charging network has their native app. There's universal apps. There's Google Maps and all of those things. Um, but that doesn't mean, kind of to what Ed was talking about, that there aren't real frustrations surrounding, certain neighborhoods, certain disadvantaged neighborhoods just not having access to charging. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to find those chargers.
That makes sense. Sasquatch always knows best. There's another question to stick with you, Rosa.
Sure.
Could you speak to the myth-busting campaign? How specific do you think it is to the communities that you're working in, or the states that you're working in, or how much applicability is there to other parts of the country?
Yeah, so I do think there are parts of the campaign that are general enough that can be applicable to other parts of the country or in other states. If you're interested in that sort of work or having that conversation with me, I would encourage you to take it offline with myself or somebody from our communications team. But when Veloz kind of shot those and through concepting, we weren't necessarily thinking specifically California. We were just thinking EV drivers at a holistic level.
Okay. Um, there's a question that's just come in that I think is on everyone's mind. So I'm going to ask this one before we get into any others. How will your work change if the administration changes in November, if at all? I will open that up to whoever wants to get us started.
I think it'll just drive more and more convening to make sure that the momentum towards an EV transition doesn't slow down, right? We want to make sure that this stays top of mind, regardless of who's sitting in the White House. This transition, it's a revolution, right? It needs to happen, and it will happen. If not for the climate sakes, then for innovation sakes, then for technology's sake. So it'll if anything, it'll become more important to do what we do.
Yeah, I agree. I feel that the momentum has built. I don't know that we've reached a full tipping point at this point, but there is just a lot of momentum, continued growth in EVs and the infrastructure as well. I feel that the money that has been made available so far has not fully made it to deployments yet. And so there's a lot of that people will still see coming about, even if funding for some reason is cut off. So I think there's a lot happening that will continue to move the momentum forward.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that this transition from gasoline and diesel to electricity is not happening just in the U.S. And so that while the policy at the national level is important and does have an impact, I don't want to minimize that. Is that these are all global car companies that where they need to move from gasoline to electric drive outside of the U.S. as well, and that we don't want the U.S. to be falling behind other countries in this transition, but I think there is a sort of a broader push to move to now that we've started this transition, to keep it going. And so while it will be, if there is an administration that is not friendly to environmental policy and to electric vehicles specifically, that's going to be a headwind. It's not the only thing driving this transition.
Okay, and we're about to finish up, so just to quickly go around one more time from each of our panelists, but I'd love to hear from each of you about one misunderstanding or piece of misinformation in your work or in the work that you're doing that you think needs addressing. As our misinformation expert, Rosa, I'll ask you to go first, and then we'll go to others.
Yeah, I think the most common bit of can you hear me? I think the most common bit of misinformation that we've been hearing over and over again is that the EV transition it's dead. It's not going to work. Nobody wants an EV. And we are at the forefront of one of the most significant technological shifts since the Industrial Revolution. And that kind of transition just doesn't come without a few bumps in the road. So we're gonna stay, we're gonna come, and we're gonna, challenge those myths throughout the years.
Nice. Ed, I'll bring you in next.
Yeah, sure. So this one probably isn't one of the most often heard ones out there, but it really gets under my skin when I'm speaking with folks and it comes up, because I just believe it's such a false myth, and that is that people will say, I will never buy an EV because they catch on fire, and it's just and they'll say, I've seen the video, I've seen it on TV, they just burst into flames, and the data is so different from that, right? There's I think it's 20 data from the NTSB says that 25 per 100,000 vehicles sold of electric vehicles might have caught on fire. And for gas vehicles, something like 1,500 vehicles per 100,000 vehicles sold. So it's happening around you all the time. It's just that it's not new technology with gasoline vehicles, and so the news doesn't put it out there. So that one gets me. I'd love to get that straightened out.
Yeah, we're giving Rosa some work to do for the next year or so. David, very briefly, are there any you would touch on?
Yeah, I think just touch on what Rosa said is, also just the perspective of this is a transition that's happening over a long period of time, and that looking at sort of week by week or month by month sales figures and saying that this little blip means that EVs, the transition's not happening, is just wrong. Or looking at the fact that we want to go to 100% but we only have this many chargers. Well, you have to take a step back and go, we're on this transition and this is happening, and how do we accelerate it, rather than looking at the really short time scale bumps in the road.
Well said. Simbi, I'll bring you in to close us out, but thank you to our panelists for your time today.
Thank you, everyone. Tom, I want to pose the question to you. Are there any myths that are currently frustrating?
Oh, God. I've been in question mode, not answer mode. I'm going to have to mull it over. But...
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you all so much, David, Ed, Tom, and Rosa, for kicking off our fall webinar series. I really want to appreciate you all for joining us today. We're looking forward to more connections after the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending out a webinar recap email It will include the links that all of the presenters mentioned, the studies. We will also have the contact information for our panelists so we can continue the dialogue. I always say this every time. An hour is not enough time to have this discussion, but we hope that this is just a start and we continue having this discussion offline. Our next webinar won't happen until Tuesday, October 15th, but we will be talking about transforming school transportation with electric school buses. We have a great panel for that. In the meantime, we're going to be taking a break in September for the Roadmap Conference. If you haven't registered, please do so now. And I just want to say again, I appreciate our speakers and panelists today and looking forward to more connections offline. Have a great day, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you in person in September and online in October. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. See you.